Imagine waking up one morning, expecting the world to greet you as a prince, a future king, someone with a place in history reserved since birth, and instead, you find it's been quietly taken away. Not by the press, not by strangers, not by fate, but by your own family, by the very institution that was meant to protect you. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, reportedly faced exactly this nightmare when King Charles, supported by 24 influential British dukes, made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. The story that follows is not just about royal protocol. It is about betrayal, heartbreak, family tension, and a secret war within the palace that very few outside its gilded walls have ever witnessed. And the moment Harry realized what had happened, the tears he shed were as much about loss as they were about the realization of just how precarious royal life can be. But why now? Why would a future king, or someone who once had every claim to the throne, be quietly erased from the succession list in the 21st century, in an era when the monarchy is supposed to be more transparent than ever? What drove 24 powerful dukes, along with the king himself, to effectively pull Harry out of history? Was it just protocol, or was there something deeper, more personal at play? These are questions few dare to ask publicly, yet the answers, hidden behind palace walls, could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the British monarchy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The day it happened, the palace stood still. Rumors suggest that a single letter, quietly delivered, triggered a chain of events that no one fully anticipated. Inside the grand halls, advisors whispered in corridors, aides exchanged nervous glances, and for Harry, a man raised in privilege and expectation, the world suddenly felt cold, distant, and untrustworthy. To the outside observer, this might have looked like another routine reshuffling of royal responsibilities. But the truth is far more dramatic, far more human. Because when someone tells you that your place in history has been stripped away, there is nothing procedural about the heartbreak that follows. Imagine being Harry at that moment. A prince with titles, a global following, a family that expects loyalty and obedience, and yet, a human being facing isolation, confusion, and betrayal. We often forget that behind the carefully curated public image, behind the formal appearances and the polished smiles, royals experience pain, disappointment, and vulnerability just like anyone else. Harry's tears were not just about the throne. They were about trust broken, expectations shattered, and the deep emotional wound of being sidelined by the very people who were supposed to champion him. And who are the 24 dukes who played a decisive role in this story? Their influence cannot be overstated. These men, steeped in centuries of royal tradition and power, are more than ceremonial figures. They wield political influence, control vast estates, and shape public perception of the monarchy. When they act together, even a prince cannot simply ignore their collective judgment. Harry, once shielded by his father's position and his own fame, suddenly found himself confronted with a reality where alliances, loyalty, and hidden agendas dictated outcomes far beyond his control. To understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to consider the palace's inner workings. Royal succession is often portrayed as straightforward, a clear line from parent to child. But it is anything but simple. There are rules, precedents, historical obligations, and, crucially, human biases. King Charles, now the head of the monarchy, has long been seen as both dutiful and calculating. Some might say strategic. And when the 24 dukes backed his decision to remove Harry from the list of potential heirs, it signaled not just a procedural move, but a coordinated assertion of power, an unmistakable message that the family hierarchy would not bend for personal feelings or sentiment. But the story does not end with protocol. It never does. What happened inside that private room? The room with no cameras, no journalists, no witnesses, was a crucible moment. Harry, confronted with a decision made for him rather than by him, faced a choice: accept the move quietly, protest, or fight back. Sources suggest he was visibly shaken, caught between anger, sadness, and disbelief. The intensity of the emotion, the raw human reaction, is something tabloids can never fully capture. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a glimpse of the man behind the prince. While much of the world only sees the public engagements, the ceremonies, and the official statements, the truth is far more nuanced. The private world of the royals is a high-stakes arena where influence, loyalty, and secrecy are as valuable as gold. Decisions about succession are not made lightly, and when they are accompanied by the backing of influential dukes, the consequences are immediate and far-reaching. Harry's removal from the succession list was not just symbolic. It carried tangible repercussions: loss of potential future authority, shifting public perception, and an emotional toll that would ripple through every aspect of his life. You might be wondering, why did Harry's removal happen now, in 2026, when he had already stepped back from active royal duties years ago? Timing, it seems, is everything. The monarchy is facing unprecedented scrutiny from both the public and the media. Internal divisions, long simmering under a veneer of unity, began to surface with alarming clarity. And with Charles now fully asserting his authority as king, and with the dukes reinforcing that authority behind the scenes, Harry found himself in a perfect storm of timing, politics, and family tension. But the most fascinating part of this story is not just the removal itself. It is the hidden drama that preceded it. Private letters hint at warnings Harry may have ignored. Confidential meetings suggest negotiations that may have broken down, and whispers from aides reveal that certain family members were quietly pushing for this outcome for months, even years, before it became official. The palace, often portrayed as a bastion of decorum, can also be a battlefield where human ambition, jealousy, and strategic thinking collide in ways that seem almost Shakespearean. And what about Meghan? The Duchess of Sussex has often been portrayed as the outsider, the polarizing figure in the royal narrative. But in reality, her presence and influence on Harry's decisions cannot be ignored. The palace has long viewed her as both a threat and a transformative figure. Some argue that her role in this story was merely circumstantial. Others believe she was central to the tensions that ultimately led to Harry's removal. The truth, like much of royal history, lies somewhere in between. A mixture of personal choice, external pressure, and the unrelenting scrutiny of the institution. Consider this: when a person is told their place in history is no longer theirs, it changes everything. It shifts identity, alters relationships, and forces a reckoning with what truly matters. Harry's story is a cautionary tale of privilege, expectation, and human vulnerability. For decades, he had been groomed for a life that now appears forever altered. Yet, amid the heartbreak, there is also resilience, a determination to chart a path beyond the palace walls, even when the past threatens to overshadow the future. By now, you may be asking yourself, what exactly did the removal entail? Was Harry stripped of titles, responsibilities, or simply his theoretical claim? The answer is complex. Titles and ceremonial roles are one thing. The symbolic weight of being part of the line of succession is another. To the outside world, it might seem minor. But for Harry, it struck at the heart of identity, family loyalty, and personal destiny. And it set off a chain of events that would reshape not only his life, but the public perception of the monarchy itself. And here's where the story truly begins. Because the details we're about to uncover, the meetings, the secret communications, the emotional confrontations, paint a picture of a royal world that is far more human, far more fragile, and far more dramatic than anyone has imagined. It's a story of power, heartbreak, and courage. A story that raises questions we all must consider. How far should family loyalty stretch? When does tradition become tyranny? And what happens when the very institution meant to protect you becomes the one that turns its back? But what happened in that room, in that moment, when Harry realized his throne was slipping away, changed everything. No cameras captured it. No journalist reported it. And yet, its impact echoes through every decision Harry has made since. The story we are about to tell does not just recount events. It explores motivations, emotions, and consequences that the world rarely sees. It is, in every sense, a royal drama, played out in private corridors but felt publicly in every headline and every tear shed in silence. And as we delve deeper, keep one question in mind. How does a man reconcile the love for his family with the sting of betrayal, the duty to tradition with the desire for personal freedom, and the weight of history with the longing for his own path? The answers lie ahead, in the rooms, letters, and decisions that shaped this extraordinary chapter in modern royal history. Imagine this. A letter, small and unassuming, slips quietly under a door in one of the grandest palaces in the world. No fanfare, no announcement, no cameras to capture it. Yet within that simple envelope lies the power to shatter expectations, redirect destinies, and bring a prince, someone born into history, face to face with a reality he never anticipated. For Prince Harry, the day the palace stood still began not with a ceremony, a speech, or a royal engagement, but with this quiet, almost banal act. And yet, as the story would unfold, that moment would mark the beginning of a transformation that no one, inside or outside the palace, could have foreseen. The morning started like any other in the royal schedule, aides scuttling through corridors, tea being poured, arrangements being finalized for appearances and briefings. But there was an undercurrent of tension, something subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders, but palpable to those who moved within the inner sanctum. Whispers, the hurried exchange of notes, the odd glance between senior staff, signals of an extraordinary event in motion. Harry, usually shielded by his routine and his public role, began to sense the shift before the letter even reached his hands. Something was coming, something unspoken yet heavy in the air. When the envelope finally arrived, the shock of its contents hit immediately. Unlike the clear-cut letters of appointment or correspondence with well-meaning advisors, this one carried authority cloaked in civility, its language carefully calibrated, its phrasing formal and precise. And yet, beneath the surface, the message could not have been more devastating. The young duke, once a clear figure in the line of succession, was being removed, not temporarily, not conditionally, but entirely, from the official list of potential heirs. To grasp the gravity of this, one must understand what succession truly means. To the casual observer, it is a line on a chart, a series of names following the monarch. But to those involved, it is identity, legacy, and expectation crystallized in a single reality. For Harry, it meant that the path he had grown up envisioning, service, duty, prominence, historical impact, had been quietly erased. The palace, which had always represented safety, tradition, and continuity, suddenly felt alien. Its walls, once symbols of belonging, now loomed as reminders of exclusion. Harry's immediate reaction, according to those close to him, was a mixture of disbelief and emotional collapse. A lifetime of preparation, of balancing public expectation with private ambition, seemed to vanish in a single, unyielding stroke. He walked the familiar corridors of the palace, each echoing step amplifying the sense of isolation. Staff and aides, trained to maintain discretion, watched in silence, unable to intervene but acutely aware of the magnitude of the moment. Every hallway, every ornate chamber, seemed suddenly infused with tension, as if the very stones of the palace were aware that history had shifted that day. What made this moment even more extraordinary was the orchestration behind it. This was not a sudden whim or an impulsive decision. It was the result of meticulous planning, consensus building, and strategic influence. King Charles, in coordination with 24 of the kingdom's most powerful dukes, had collectively determined that Harry's removal was necessary. Each duke, steeped in history, responsibility, and a unique understanding of the monarchy's future, had weighed in. Their agreement lent the decision an almost irrefutable authority, transforming it from a personal family matter into a declaration of institutional will. Consider for a moment the psychological impact of that knowledge on Harry. Knowing that not only his father but a network of long-established aristocrats had conspired, whether consciously or through procedural alignment, to remove him, the emotional weight intensified. This was more than disappointment. It was a profound, layered betrayal. For a man who had devoted his life to service, who had consistently sought to balance personal authenticity with royal duty, the realization that his future had been curtailed in such a controlled, deliberate manner was devastating. And yet, this day was not simply about private anguish. It marked the beginning of a ripple effect that would extend outward, through family, media, and public perception. Once the letter had circulated internally, aides began preparing statements, adjusting schedules, and recalibrating expectations. The palace's communications team, ever conscious of optics, faced the unprecedented challenge of addressing the change without igniting public scandal. Meanwhile, Harry, caught in the whirlwind of personal shock, had to navigate not only his emotions but the intricate dance of maintaining dignity, privacy, and composure in a situation where every glance and gesture could be scrutinized. The palace staff, accustomed to managing routine disruptions, felt the gravity immediately. Aides whispered in corners, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down hallways, and doors clicked shut with an unusual finality. Even those who had served the royal family for decades sensed the unusual magnitude of the moment. A prince, a global figure, suddenly rendered vulnerable in a way that history seldom allowed. Conversations were clipped, meetings held behind closed doors, and every movement seemed to carry the weight of unspoken implications. Amid this tension, Harry's thoughts turned inward. What did this removal mean for his identity? For his relationship with his father? With William? With the public who had followed him, admired him, and, in many cases, supported him unconditionally? The letter, while succinct and formal, contained no answers to these pressing questions. It offered no comfort, no explanation beyond procedural necessity. And in that vacuum of clarity, fear, sadness, and disbelief surged in equal measure. It was in this emotional crucible that Harry's resilience began to manifest. Despite the shock, he sought counsel, reaching out to trusted friends and advisors. Some urged quiet acceptance, others encouraged measured protest. Every decision was weighed not just for its immediate effect, but for its historical and familial ramifications. And all the while, the palace corridors, the ornate rooms, and the unseen eyes of senior staff bore witness to the unfolding drama, a quiet storm of human emotion beneath the grandeur of tradition. The day did not end with a single resolution. Rather, it evolved into a series of cascading events, private discussions, subtle communications, and strategic consultations. King Charles, maintaining a veneer of composure, met with key aides to reinforce the procedural authority of the decision. The dukes, meanwhile, engaged in separate consultations, their collective influence ensuring that no reversal could occur without significant upheaval. And Harry, caught between the weight of institutional power and personal anguish, faced a profound dilemma. How to respond when the very structure that had defined his life now seemed to exclude him entirely. What makes this day unforgettable and historically significant is not only the act itself but the psychological, familial, and public implications. A prince removed from the line of succession in the modern era is almost unprecedented. The decision sent ripples through the monarchy, reminding everyone, from staff to public observers, that history is not solely written by birthright, but also by strategy, influence, and timing. For Harry, the personal cost was immediate. For the monarchy, the ramifications would unfold over years, influencing public perception, family dynamics, and the balance of power within an institution that prides itself on continuity. And yet, in the midst of this, questions remain. Was Harry's removal entirely necessary? Were there alternative paths that could have preserved both protocol and personal dignity? Did personal grievances, past conflicts, and familial tension influence the decision as much as formal rules? These are not merely academic questions. They speak to the very heart of what happened that day, in that quiet moment, in those silent palace corridors. By the end of that day, Harry had confronted the stark reality of his situation. A path he had assumed was guaranteed, by birth, expectation, and tradition, had been altered, and the emotional impact was undeniable. His tears, though private, symbolized a rupture in the relationship between personal identity and institutional expectation, a theme that would resonate throughout the days, months, and years to come. When most people think of the monarchy, they picture kings, queens, princes, and princesses. Rarely do they consider the hidden network of influence that quietly shapes decisions behind the gilded walls. Yet in the story of Prince Harry's removal from the succession list, this network, the 24 British dukes, played a central, decisive role. To fully understand what happened, who influenced the decision, and why Harry's future suddenly seemed in jeopardy, we have to step into a world few ever see. A world of centuries-old privilege, carefully maintained alliances, and unspoken power. The dukes in question are not mere ceremonial figures. Each holds vast estates, hereditary responsibilities, and sway over not only public perception but also private palace discussions. Many of these men have served in official royal capacities for decades. Others wield influence through parliamentary connections, philanthropic endeavors, and long-standing relationships with senior royals. When 24 dukes collectively align their stance on a matter as sensitive as succession, it is more than a suggestion. It is an assertion of authority that even a prince cannot ignore. So who are these 24 men, and why do they matter? Some of them are household names within the aristocracy, holders of ancient titles, some dating back centuries, with deep roots in the political, social, and economic fabric of Britain. Others are less known publicly but possess behind-the-scenes influence that surpasses that of the visible royal family. Each brings to the table their own agenda, their own alliances, and their own interpretation of what the monarchy should be in the modern era. Together, their collective judgment forms a formidable force, a kind of shadow council whose decisions can alter the course of royal history. Among the dukes, several stand out for their proximity to the crown. These are men who have served as advisors, confidants, and long-term allies to King Charles. Their counsel is sought not merely for ceremonial matters, but for decisions with far-reaching implications. Historically, such dukes have had a role in succession disputes, estate management, and even royal marriages. Their presence in this decision about Harry was not incidental, it was deliberate. Their combined agreement effectively sealed the outcome. Yet the story is not just about power, it is about personality, influence, and, in some cases, rivalry. Some of these dukes reportedly viewed Harry's behavior and choices with skepticism long before the letter of removal arrived. They questioned his decisions to step back from royal duties, to speak publicly about private family matters, and to cultivate a global persona independent of the monarchy. To them, Harry represented a challenge to tradition, a disruption to the carefully maintained balance of hierarchy and protocol. Their support of Charles's decision was, in part, an effort to reinforce the stability of the institution itself. It's worth noting that the Duke's influence extends beyond the palace. Many hold estates that are cultural landmarks, control charitable organizations, or serve as patrons of long-established institutions. This gives them a voice not just inside the royal household, but across the public sphere. When they weigh in on a matter like succession, their opinions carry weight not only with the king, but with parliament, media outlets, and, indirectly, the public. It is a form of soft power exercised quietly yet effectively, shaping narratives and expectations without the need for overt announcement. The process by which these 24 dukes were consulted is shrouded in secrecy, but insider accounts suggest that it was methodical. Meetings were held, letters exchanged, and subtle negotiations conducted to ensure consensus. Some dukes reportedly expressed concern over the optics of removing Harry, aware of the global attention such a decision would attract. Others argued that tradition must be upheld above all, regardless of emotional consequences. The result was unanimity, or near unanimity, that Harry's removal was necessary, or at least inevitable. This raises a crucial question. What motivated the dukes? Was it concern for the monarchy's stability? Was it personal disapproval of Harry's choices? Or was it something more strategic, a long-term effort to consolidate influence and ensure that future generations follow a carefully defined path? Likely, the answer is all of the above. In institutions like the monarchy, power is rarely exercised for a single reason. Decisions are layered, and each actor brings their own motivations, fears, and ambitions to the table. Among the 24, there were reportedly some who acted as intermediaries between Charles and Harry, conveying messages, gauging reactions, and attempting to soften the blow. Yet, even these sympathetic voices could not prevent the outcome. The sheer weight of consensus, coupled with historical precedent and institutional loyalty, ensured that Harry's fate was effectively sealed. It is a stark reminder that, within this world, even the most famous and influential figures, celebrities in their own right, are not immune to the forces of hierarchy, tradition, and collective authority. Interestingly, The dukes themselves have a historical context that informs their perspective. Many come from families that have navigated succession disputes, political upheavals, and social transformations. They are, in a sense, the custodians of the monarchy's long memory, carrying the lessons of past crises into the present. To them, the question of Harry's removal was not simply about one individual. It was about preserving the integrity of an institution that has endured for centuries. In their view, maintaining the line of succession in a controlled, predictable manner was paramount, even if it meant causing temporary personal anguish. And yet, within this consensus lies tension. Not all dukes were fully aligned in their reasoning. Some were motivated by loyalty to the king, others by concerns about public perception. A few were reportedly influenced by private rivalries or past grievances, conscious that decisions about succession could reshape influence for generations. It is this mixture of motives, pragmatic, emotional, and political, that makes their role in Harry's removal so compelling. This was not a monolithic action. It was a carefully orchestrated negotiation, informed by history, personal judgment, and the collective power of 24 individuals who understand the monarchy better than most of the world ever will. For Harry, the realization that this network had acted in concert to sideline him was a psychological shock. No single person could have carried out this decision alone. It required coordination, alignment, and mutual reinforcement. The sheer scale of that coordination underscored the gravity of the act and its finality. Unlike disputes that can be reversed or protested in court, this was a collective, institutional judgment, one with almost no room for negotiation or appeal. Yet, paradoxically, the Duke's involvement also opened a window into palace dynamics that the public rarely sees. It revealed a system where power is distributed not just by title, but by influence, history, and alignment with institutional priorities. It showed that monarchy is as much about human networks as it is about ceremonial grandeur. And it hinted at an uncomfortable truth for those who admire royal life from afar. Even those born into privilege must navigate complex webs of loyalty, hierarchy, and expectation, or risk being sidelined entirely. As we move forward in this story, the role of these 24 dukes cannot be overstated. They are the unseen architects of a decision that has reshaped Harry's life and altered the perception of the modern monarchy. Understanding who they are, how they operate, and why they acted as they did provides a lens through which we can interpret the emotional, political, and historical significance of Harry's removal from the succession list. It also sets the stage for the next layer of this story. The deeply personal conflict between father and son, and the emotional fallout that would follow in the wake of this unprecedented action. Because while the Dukes provided the framework, the human drama, raw, emotional, and irreducible, was just beginning. The palace had acted in concert, history had been invoked, and tradition had been upheld. But in the hearts and minds of those involved, the consequences were immediate, personal, and profound. And what happened next would reveal the fault lines not just within the monarchy, but within Harry himself, forcing him to confront questions about identity, loyalty, and the true cost of belonging to an institution that had just turned against him. And as for the Dukes, their decisions, influence, and motives would continue to echo through every public statement, every media report, and every private confrontation in the weeks and months to come, casting a shadow that would challenge Harry in ways he could never have anticipated. Imagine standing in a room with your father, the very man who shaped your earliest memories, your expectations, and for better or worse, your sense of identity. Now imagine that this man, the king, looks at you not as a son, but as an obstacle, someone whose choices threaten a centuries-old institution. For Prince Harry, that moment was not hypothetical. It was painfully real. The conflict between father and son, simmering for years behind palace doors, reached a boiling point in the wake of the succession decision, and the emotional fallout would define both men's relationship for years to come. The tension between Charles and Harry is not new. From the earliest days of Harry's childhood, observers have noted the complex dynamics between the father, the heir apparent, and his younger son. Charles, raised under enormous public scrutiny and aware of the weight of expectation, carries a deep sense of duty. His life has been shaped by protocol, tradition, and and an unrelenting awareness of history. Harry, on the other hand, has often been characterized as impulsive, independent-minded, and fiercely protective of his personal autonomy. Where Charles sees responsibility and order, Harry seeks authenticity and freedom, a clash almost destined to create friction. But what happened after the letter confirming Harry's removal from the succession list brought that friction into sharp, undeniable focus. According to insiders, Harry requested a private meeting with his father, hoping for explanation, understanding, or perhaps even reconciliation. What he found instead was a man resolute, a man who spoke with the authority of a king and the weight of centuries of monarchy behind every word. Charles reportedly explained that the decision was not personal, that it was about duty, tradition, and the stability of the crown. But to Harry, it felt like rejection, like a verdict on his character, his choices, and his place in the family. The conversation, though conducted behind closed doors, is said to have been intensely emotional. Sources suggest that voices were raised, silences lingered uncomfortably, and gestures spoke volumes where words failed. Harry, whose tears have become emblematic of his human side in public perception, reportedly struggled to contain a flood of emotion. Anger, betrayal, and grief swirled together, creating a storm of feeling that no one in the palace hierarchy could simply dismiss. For Charles, this confrontation may have seemed necessary, a way to assert his authority and clarify the family hierarchy. But for Harry, it was the moment he fully realized that loyalty to family and duty to tradition could collide in ways that leave no winner. This feud, however, is not purely emotional. It is deeply symbolic. Every action, word, and reaction between Charles and Harry carries historical weight. The monarchy, despite its image of grandeur and continuity, is an institution dependent on perception. To the public, a family united projects strength. A family divided invites scrutiny and speculation. And yet, within these constraints, human emotion cannot be suppressed. Charles, for all his regal composure, is still a father grappling with disappointment and concern for the future of the crown. Harry, for all his public poise, is still a son feeling excluded, misunderstood, and, above all, powerless in a system that has suddenly turned against him. Adding complexity to the feud are the intermediaries, advisors, aides, and confidants who attempted to manage both the procedural aspects of succession and the emotional fallout. Some encouraged Charles to maintain firmness, arguing that any leniency would undermine authority and invite chaos. Others sought to shield Harry, offering counsel, perspective, and emotional support. For Harry, this mixture of voices was confusing and isolating. Every piece of advice seemed tainted by bias. Every gesture of goodwill came with strings attached. He realized, painfully, that within the palace, no one is entirely neutral. Every actor is part of a web of history, influence, and loyalty. And then there is William, Harry's older brother. His presence in this feud cannot be overlooked. William, groomed for kingship from birth, represents continuity and adherence to protocol. To him, Charles's decision may have seemed not just appropriate, but necessary. Yet to Harry, William's tacit support of the move, or at least his failure to intervene, felt like a personal betrayal. Sibling dynamics, already complicated by competition, expectation, and differing temperaments, were now intensified by the stakes of monarchy itself. The feud was no longer just father versus son. It was a triangle of tension, history, and familial loyalty. Amid all this, the emotional stakes were astronomical. Harry's sense of identity, intertwined with his role in the family and the institution, faced a sudden, jarring recalibration. He had been raised to serve, to represent, to embody the monarchy in public and private life. And yet, the message he received was unmistakable. You are no longer central. You are no longer counted among the potential heirs. You are, in a very real sense, excluded. The psychological impact of this, on a man who has spent his life navigating the pressures of public scrutiny, is profound. It is a grief few outside the palace can fully comprehend, and one that would shape Harry's decisions, public statements, and emotional state for years to come. Yet there was a strategic aspect to the feud, one that underscored the calculated nature of Charles's decision. By confronting Harry directly, asserting authority, and framing the removal as procedural rather than personal, Charles maintained control over the narrative. The monarchy thrives on image, and any perception that the king is weak, indecisive, or overly influenced by emotion could be damaging. From this perspective, the confrontation was not simply a personal dispute. It was an act of institutional preservation. Charles had to balance fatherly concern with kingly responsibility, a task few could navigate successfully. Meanwhile, Harry's response was equally strategic, even amid emotional turmoil. He realized that public displays of outrage, while satisfying in the moment, could have long-term repercussions on his image, his relationships, and his capacity to influence the monarchy in the future. He navigated a fine line between assertion of self and adherence to discretion, knowing that any misstep could be seized upon by media, advisors, and, most importantly, history. The feud, therefore, was both deeply personal and inescapably public, an entanglement of emotion, power, and legacy. Historical parallels only heighten the tension. Families of power have long experienced internal conflict, often hidden from public view. Yet rarely has a confrontation played out in an era of constant global scrutiny. In previous centuries, a prince removed from succession might have disappeared quietly from public attention. Harry, however, operates in a media-saturated world where every expression, gesture, and statement is amplified. The feud with his father is therefore not just a private matter. It is a spectacle, a narrative that shapes public perception and influences the monarchy's future in ways that cannot be contained. And then there are the unresolved questions. Could Charles have handled this differently? Could Harry have anticipated the move? Did communication breakdown exacerbate what might have been a manageable conflict? Each question lingers in the air, unanswered, amplifying the emotional weight of the feud. The palace, though steeped in tradition, is also a human environment, subject to error, misunderstanding, and the unpredictability of relationships. The removal from succession is just the first domino. The personal conflict that follows may be the most consequential. By the end of this confrontation, the distance between father and son had grown. It was no longer simply a matter of protocol or duty. It had become a profound emotional divide. Harry felt the sting of exclusion, the pain of judgment, and the weight of disappointment. Charles, meanwhile, faced the challenge of maintaining authority while grappling with the undeniable love he felt for his son. Their feud, while deeply private, would soon manifest in subtle ways throughout public life, in appearances, in statements, and in interactions observed by millions. And yet, the drama was far from over. This confrontation, though emotionally charged and historically significant, was only the beginning. What followed would reveal not just the depth of the rift between father and son, but also the intricate role of intermediaries, advisors, and, crucially, the dukes who had collectively influenced the decision. Every move, every word, every choice would carry consequences, setting the stage for revelations that would shake the monarchy and challenge the public's understanding of family, loyalty, and duty. Few figures in modern royal history have provoked as much fascination, scrutiny, and speculation as Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. Loved, criticized, vilified, and defended in equal measure, Meghan's presence in the royal family has always carried an aura of disruption. Not because of her personality alone, but because she represented change in a centuries-old institution that values tradition above all else. In the story of Prince Harry's removal from the succession list, Meghan's role cannot be overstated. She was, simultaneously, confidant, strategist, and lightning rod, a complex presence whose influence reverberated far beyond the palace walls. From the very beginning, Meghan's entrance into the royal family was unprecedented in many ways. An American, a former actress, and someone who had cultivated an independent identity before marriage, she challenged centuries of unspoken norms. The monarchy, often cautious, slow to adapt, and resistant to outside influence, suddenly had to accommodate a personality that did not fit neatly into established patterns. Meghan's presence forced conversations about race, media, mental health, and modern relevance. Conversations that had simmered in private but now erupted in public view. For Harry, her arrival represented both love and partnership, someone who understood him, challenged him, and supported him. Yet for some within the palace, she was seen as an unpredictable variable, someone who disrupted the carefully balanced dynamics of family, tradition, and public perception. As tensions surrounding the succession decision escalated, Meghan became an inseparable part of the equation. Reports suggest that she and Harry spent countless hours discussing strategy, public messaging, and private responses to the unfolding events. Her role was not merely that of a supportive spouse. She was a participant in the deliberation, a sounding board, and, at times, a force urging action. This level of involvement, while natural in a marriage, was viewed by certain palace insiders as intrusive or even threatening. In their eyes, Meghan's presence amplified the stakes, adding complexity to an already delicate situation. One of the key challenges Meghan faced was managing perception. Publicly, she had to appear calm, composed, and loyal to the family while privately grappling with profound stress and emotional weight. Her every gesture, statement, and appearance was scrutinized through a lens of suspicion, often interpreted as either manipulation or defiance, depending on who reported it. This duality, balancing public optics with private reality, is a recurring theme in royal life. But for Meghan, the pressure was exponentially higher, compounded by the unprecedented circumstances of the succession removal. Interestingly, Meghan's influence was also strategic. Sources suggest that she advised Harry on how to navigate communications, interactions with the media, and engagement with palace advisors. Her guidance was rooted in both personal experience and a keen understanding of public perception. She understood that any misstep could be magnified, that emotion could be weaponized, and that the monarchy operates in a world where appearances can be as powerful as reality. By helping Harry frame his responses, anticipate outcomes, and manage optics, Meghan became an essential partner in mitigating what could have been catastrophic exposure for him. Yet, Meghan's role was not without controversy. Some palace insiders reportedly saw her as the catalyst for Harry's more independent decisions, such as stepping back from full-time royal duties or engaging with media platforms outside traditional channels. In their view, she encouraged a path that undermined hierarchy and challenged convention. Others, however, saw her actions as protective, an effort to safeguard Harry's well-being, mental health, and personal autonomy in an institution known for strict rules and intense scrutiny. The tension between these perspectives underscores the complexity of Meghan's role: ally, disruptor, strategist, and emotional anchor, all at once. Her influence was particularly evident in private meetings. When Harry met with his father, advisors, and even the dukes to discuss the implications of his removal from succession, Meghan often contributed guidance, suggested approaches, and helped anticipate potential responses. While she may not have been physically present at every meeting, her counsel shaped Harry's decisions, framing his responses in ways that balanced dignity with assertiveness. For Harry, this partnership was invaluable, providing emotional and strategic support when he faced some of the most intense pressure of his life. Meghan's role also extended beyond strategy to emotional resilience. Harry has publicly discussed his struggles with mental health, pressures of public life, and the challenges of balancing duty with personal freedom. Meghan's presence offered a stabilizing influence during the crisis. She was reportedly the one who reminded him to step back, reflect, and consider long-term consequences rather than reacting impulsively. Her support was not passive. It was active, nuanced, and deeply consequential in shaping how Harry navigated this unprecedented moment in his life. Yet, paradoxically, Meghan's involvement fueled tension with some family members. Charles, certain senior advisors, and even some of the dukes reportedly viewed her as an agent of disruption. Her perceived influence over Harry's decisions, combined with the couple's willingness to communicate candidly with the public, was seen by some as a challenge to tradition and authority. These dynamics intensified the emotional stakes of the feud, creating a complex web of loyalty, perception, and personal ambition. The media, of course, amplified every nuance of Meghan's role. Headlines oscillated between praise and condemnation, often exaggerating or misrepresenting her influence. To the public, she was either a protective partner guiding Harry through treacherous waters or a manipulative outsider driving wedges within the family. In reality, her role was far more complex. An active, engaged participant navigating one of the most high-stakes family and institutional conflicts imaginable. It's also worth noting the cultural dimensions of Meghan's presence. As a biracial woman in a historically traditional institution, her very identity challenged long-held perceptions of the monarchy. Some insiders reportedly viewed her as a disruptor not just personally but culturally, pushing boundaries and forcing conversations that had long been avoided. This context adds another layer to her role in Harry's removal from the succession list. She was, in effect, a catalyst for confronting entrenched systems, whether intentionally or not. Yet through all of this, Meghan's focus remained on Harry. While the palace dynamics, media scrutiny, and historical context were overwhelming, she concentrated on ensuring that Harry retained his sense of self, agency, and emotional stability. Her presence was a lifeline, a source of counsel, and a buffer against the isolating pressure of being simultaneously a prince stripped of succession rights and a man facing a deeply personal family rift. Despite this, challenges remained. Meghan had to navigate the optics of her involvement, the judgment of palace insiders, and the scrutiny of a global audience. Every decision had potential consequences. Every statement could be interpreted as defiance or disloyalty. Balancing these factors while supporting Harry required extraordinary patience, strategic insight, and emotional intelligence. Her role was as much about endurance as it was about influence, a constant negotiation of perception, reality, and human emotion. What makes Meghan's role truly compelling is this duality. She was both a stabilizing force and a perceived threat. Her involvement provided Harry with the tools, guidance, and emotional support to navigate a crisis that could have easily spiraled out of control, yet it also intensified existing tensions with Charles, William, and the network of dukes. In effect, she became both a shield and a lightning rod, a dynamic that defined the unfolding drama. By the end of this chapter of the story, it is clear that Meghan was not a passive bystander. She was actively engaged in shaping Harry's decisions, offering counsel on strategy, managing emotional fallout, and preparing for the public and private consequences of his removal from succession. Her influence was subtle yet undeniable, a combination of emotional support, strategic insight, and unflinching loyalty. But even her involvement could not fully mitigate the pressures Harry faced. What came next? The private confrontations with his father, the continuing influence of the dukes, and the cascading consequences of the removal would challenge both Harry and Meghan in ways that no one could have anticipated, forcing them to confront not just institutional power, but the very meaning of family, loyalty, and personal identity. When most people hear about royal succession, they imagine a simple, almost mechanical process. A clear line from monarch to heir, a series of names passed down generation to generation. But the reality is far more intricate, shrouded in centuries of tradition, legal precedent, and subtle human interpretation. Prince Harry's removal from the succession list exposes just how complex and, at times, ruthless these rules can be. Understanding the mechanisms behind succession is essential to grasp why the decision was both possible and shocking, and why it hit Harry harder than almost anyone could have imagined. At the heart of succession law is a combination of statutes, historical precedent, and family custom. The Succession to the Crown Act of 2013, for example, was meant to modernize centuries-old laws, eliminating gender preference and allowing heirs to marry Catholics without losing their place. On paper, these updates seem straightforward, logical, even progressive. Yet beneath the surface, old habits die hard. Many elements of succession remain influenced by centuries-old conventions, unwritten rules, and personal judgments exercised by those in power, including the monarch and senior dukes. For Harry, this meant that the rules were never as rigid as he might have assumed. While the line of succession is listed publicly and codified, certain actions, alliances, and perceptions can subtly, or not so subtly, affect a prince's position. Acceptance or rejection of royal duties, public statements deemed inappropriate, or behavior perceived as disrespectful to tradition can all influence decisions behind the scenes. In other words, succession is not just a legal matter. It is also a human judgment, shaped by perception, precedent, and influence. One of the lesser-known aspects of succession is the role of consultation among senior aristocracy. While it may appear that the monarch alone decides matters of succession, historical precedent shows that senior nobles, including dukes, have often been consulted, particularly in cases where deviation from tradition is considered. These consultations are informal, confidential, and guided as much by politics and loyalty as by law. In Harry's case, the 24 dukes functioned as a powerful advisory council, lending legitimacy and consensus to Charles's decision. Their involvement underscores that succession is not just a legal formality. It is a collaborative act steeped in centuries of institutional influence. Another critical rule that often surprises people is the monarch's discretion over ceremonial titles, responsibilities, and privileges associated with succession. While Harry retained his existing dukedom and other honorary titles, the symbolic authority and practical benefits of being in line for the throne were selectively curtailed. This distinction may seem minor to the casual observer, but in royal terms, it is monumental. Succession is not just about being next in line. It shapes your identity, your influence, and your role within both the palace and public life. Being removed from that line subtly, yet irreversibly, alters every facet of existence as a prince. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of succession rules is how discretion can be exercised in extraordinary circumstances. The monarch, guided by precedent, advisors, and institutional norms, has the authority to make determinations that are legally sound but emotionally devastating. In Harry's situation, Charles exercised this discretion not by rewriting the law, but by applying the rules in a manner that emphasized duty, tradition, and perceived stability. It was a calculated move, one that prioritized institutional continuity over personal consideration, a stark reminder that monarchy, for all its human faces, ultimately serves a system larger than any one individual. It is also important to note that succession rules are intertwined with public perception. A decision that seems legally sound may still provoke controversy if it is perceived as unfair or arbitrary. The monarchy operates in a delicate balance, upholding tradition while maintaining credibility with the public. When Harry's removal became known, even in whispers, it sparked immediate questions. Was this about protocol or personal preference? Was the decision in the best interest of the institution, or a punitive measure against a son who dared to challenge norms? The tension between law and perception adds yet another layer of complexity to the rules of succession. Insiders have revealed that other subtle mechanisms were at play in Harry's case. For example, by emphasizing certain procedural precedents and downplaying others, advisors and dukes were able to frame the removal as a matter of tradition rather than personal judgment. Similarly, internal communications were carefully managed to prevent leaks while ensuring that the king's authority was reinforced. These strategies highlight that succession is as much about optics and influence as it is about legal entitlement, a reality Harry and Meghan had to navigate with precision. Historical context further complicates the picture. Royal succession has rarely been straightforward. Over the centuries, heirs have been removed for political reasons, personal indiscretions, or strategic marriages. Some were quietly sidelined, while others faced public scandal. Harry's removal fits into a long lineage of precedent where human judgment, often exercised behind closed doors, trumps the assumption of automatic entitlement. It is a reminder that the monarchy, while ceremonial and stately, is ultimately governed by people with biases, fears, and strategic priorities. Then there is the issue of titles and responsibilities. While succession is about the right to ascend to the throne, it also dictates the roles one may play in public life, charitable engagements, and ceremonial appearances. By removing Harry from the line, Charles and the dukes were also indirectly reshaping his capacity to influence, represent, and participate in royal life. It is a subtle but profound form of power. You may retain your name, but your voice, your platform, and your authority are suddenly limited. This form of removal, less visible but deeply effective, strikes at identity and perception simultaneously. For Harry, understanding these rules and their application was a painful learning process. He had assumed that being a prince meant security, clarity, and predictability. Instead, he discovered that succession is both legal and human, codified and discretionary, structured yet flexible in the hands of those who understand the system intimately. The realization that 24 dukes, in alignment with his father, could collectively alter his destiny without violating law but by exercising centuries of established influence was a shock that deepened the emotional impact of the removal. Yet, despite the complexity, one fact stands out. Succession rules are designed to preserve the monarchy, not individual happiness. Every decision, consultation, and precedent exists to ensure continuity, stability, and public trust. In Harry's case, his removal was framed as necessary to uphold these principles. Whether justified or not, the rules are applied by humans with their own interpretations, priorities, and loyalties. And when personal relationships intersect with these rules, the consequences can be devastating. As we consider these mechanisms, one must also reflect on the human dimension. Harry's tears, his heartbreak, and the strain on his marriage were not abstract consequences. They were direct outcomes of rules designed to prioritize institution over individual. Succession, while often studied as law or protocol, is ultimately about people, their judgments, and their exercise of power. And when those judgments are executed by 24 dukes and a monarch intent on preserving order, the stakes are nothing short of life-altering. By the end of this chapter, it becomes clear that the rules of succession are far from simple. They are a web of law, precedent, discretion, and human judgment, designed to protect an institution while inevitably affecting the lives of individuals within it. Harry's removal was legally permissible, institutionally supported, and strategically justified, but emotionally devastating. It underscores the fragile balance between personal identity, family loyalty, and the imperatives of tradition. And yet, the story does not end here. The rules set the stage, but the fallout, the private confrontations, the media storm, and the ongoing struggle between public duty and personal fulfillment is where the drama truly unfolds. What came next? The secret communications, the leaked letters, and the hidden negotiations that would further expose the fault lines within the monarchy would push Harry, Meghan, and even Charles into uncharted territory. In a world where headlines dominate, emails are archived, and public statements are curated, the quiet power of a letter cannot be underestimated, especially in the corridors of the British monarchy. For Prince Harry, one letter, or, more accurately, a series of letters, arrived not as mere correspondence, but as instruments of profound personal and institutional impact. These private letters, exchanged behind closed doors between the king, senior advisors, and the dukes, carried decisions, warnings, and ultimatums that would change the course of Harry's life forever. They were meticulously crafted, carefully worded, and strategically timed, but to Harry, their effect was anything but neutral. The first letter arrived on an otherwise ordinary day. Its envelope, crisp and unmarked, contained the kind of formal language that the monarchy favors, polite, procedural, almost distant. Yet beneath the surface, the words cut deep. It informed Harry of his removal from the line of succession, couched in language that emphasized duty, tradition, and necessity. There was no apology, no overt expression of emotion, only a clear statement of fact. The letter's clinical tone was, in itself, a form of emotional pressure. It suggested that the decision was inevitable, justified, and unquestionable. For Harry, reading those lines felt like a cold shock, a formal, written confirmation that his position, carefully nurtured since birth, was now irrevocably altered. But the letters did more than communicate a decision. They were instruments of framing, carefully structured to shape perception, reinforce hierarchy, and limit room for protest. One passage, for example, reminded Harry that the monarchy operates on precedents and consensus, subtly invoking the authority of the 24 dukes without directly naming them. Another highlighted the importance of public image and duty, reinforcing the idea that personal feelings must yield to institutional stability. Every paragraph, every carefully chosen word, was designed to assert control and communicate the weight of the decision. The timing of these letters added another layer of psychological impact. They were sent strategically, often following private meetings or discussions where Harry's reactions were observed. Sources suggest that the couriers delivering these letters were chosen for discretion, yet the effect on Harry was immediate and intense. Unlike a verbal confrontation, a letter cannot be countered in real time. Its authority is fixed, its judgment concrete, and its permanence chilling. For Harry, the letters were both a formal pronouncement and an emotional jolt, confirming fears he may have had but never fully faced. It wasn't just the letters themselves that shook Harry, it was the context in which they were sent. He had been navigating a delicate web of relationships, with Charles, with William, with the Dukes, and with Meghan. Every interaction, every private conversation, was now influenced by the content of these letters. Harry had to absorb not only the decision itself, but the implicit messages about loyalty, expectation, and family hierarchy. The written word, it seems, can carry weight far beyond spoken communication, especially when backed by centuries of tradition and authority. The emotional impact on Harry was profound. Those who have seen him in moments of private vulnerability describe him as stunned, even shaken, by the clarity and finality of the letters. Unlike public statements, which can be reframed or debated, a letter feels permanent. Its authority is immediate, and its implications ripple outward, affecting personal relationships, public perception, and even self-identity. For Harry, the letters represented a formalization of what had already been brewing in his private fears, a confirmation that his role in the monarchy was no longer secure, no longer central, and no longer unquestioned. What makes these letters even more significant is that they were part of a sequence. Following the initial removal notice were letters clarifying expectations, laying out conditions for future engagements, and emphasizing the importance of discretion. Each communication reinforced the previous one, creating a sense of inevitability and permanence. Together, the letters formed a layered narrative. Harry was not just being removed from succession. He was being guided, subtly coerced, and psychologically shaped to accept a new reality. And then there were the hidden communications, letters, notes, and memos exchanged between the dukes and the king. While Harry may not have had direct access to these, their existence was felt. They reinforced the decision, coordinated the messaging, and ensured that any